Hi, it's John Glynn. I'm using Photoshop Elements number 20 and I'm going to look at the quick selection tool in your toolbox. So if you go to the toolbox, it's near the top, it's next to the lasso tool, and there is the quick selection tool. When you click on that, you'll have at the bottom of your monitor underneath your photo a selection of options that relate to that specific tool. So I've got quick selection up here. There's my selection tool, and I'll quickly go through what it can do. So I click on that, put it over the top of my picture, and I get a brush. It's circular and there's a plus sign in the middle of my brush. If I hold down the left mouse key, I'm using a PC, hold down the left mouse key and I can make a selection. You can see that there's a selection with little dotted line around the selection, and as I push with my left mouse key you can see that I increased my selection, and I can add further areas to my selection by just moving my brush, move to a different part of the picture, hold down the left mouse key, and I can make a further selection elsewhere. Okay, to be more accurate, one would actually zoom in and get much closer to the area of your selection, but this is just a quick overview. If I want to reduce the selection, I've got choices. I can either go to add and subtract. I can subtract by clicking the subtract option, and I get a minus sign in my circle, in my brush, and then holding down the left mouse key allows me to remove the selection. But a quicker way is to go back to the plus to add and just hold down the alternative key on your keyboard. If I let go, I get the plus sign. If I hold down the alternative key on the keyboard, the alt key, I get a minus sign. Holding down the left mouse key, I can deselect. So I work from the outside of my selection in, and to add I go inside the selection and push out. Okay, so a very quick way of working and making selections, and it looks for an edge automatically. So it's looking for an edge, a contrast edge between my subjects that I'm selecting. So it is looking for that clean edge. So it's purely done on tones. So if the tones are very similar, it won't know, and it'll still pick up the same. It'll pick up everything basically if they're all tonally the same. So the bigger differences there are between your selection and everything else, the quicker and more accurate it will be in the case of working on it. Brush sizes are down the bottom here. If the brush is too big, you can reduce it. It's now too small, so I can make it bigger by just using the slider, and you can make it bigger and smaller. You can also use your brackets on your keyboard to do the same thing. The left hand bracket will make the brush smaller and the right hand bracket makes the brush bigger. Okay, brush settings, you have hardness, how hard the edges are going to be. You can do this under refine edge as well, which may be more accurate for you, but as a starting point, generally speaking, we don't have hard edges because it can look like it's been cut out with a knife. So we would normally have a fairly soft edge. Spacing is how quickly it will do the selection. So if I put it up to a very high number percent and do my selection, it works quite slowly. Okay, if I reduce the spacing, it works much more quickly, and you can see it jumps. So again, it might help with accuracy in your selection if you change that spacing option. It's a bit like having dots on your picture. If you have spacing down, the dots are very close together. If you push it up, the dots are further apart. So the further down it is, the quicker or more dramatic the movement of your brush is. Okay, but it might pick up too much. So it's just a matter of practicing on that and seeing what you're happiest with, and it may change depending on your subject matter. Roundness, at the moment I've got a brush which is completely round. But if I go down to roundness and change that, you'll notice that this little graphic here showing the roundness of my brush changes, and when I put it over the top of my picture, you can now see that it's more flat. It becomes kind of oval shaped rather than completely round, and you go right the way down and it becomes almost a flat line. Okay, so again, it might help on certain types of selection, but generally speaking it's just left as 100% round brush. Refining edges, I'll jump into refine edge. We can see our selection in different ways because it may be easier to understand what we're doing with our selections when we do that. We've got marching ants, which is the way that we originally saw it. You have it as an overlay so that you can have a red overlay over the areas that you're not selecting. On black, again, the areas that are black you haven't selected. On white, not selected, the white areas. Black and white. On layers, if you had other layers, but I don't have another layer, I've only got my background layer in the layers palette, so therefore there's nothing underneath it. And reveal, the layer is just seeing the picture as it was before you did the selection. So marching ants is the usual way that you see it initially, but it may be better to work in a different way when you're actually refining the edge. So if we're refining edges, you might find that you can, using the smart radius, be more accurate with your selection, and you will also have refining edge tools which enable you to continue working on your selection after you've made the changes. Even though you've done a selection, you can start working on it and maybe improving on the selection over time. So it's just a matter of having to work on that, raise selections and so on. So it's a matter of just jumping between these sort of options. There's a magnifying tool for zooming in on your selection and a hand tool for moving around the selections. You'll also have a way of feathering the selection. You can see that it gets smooth or softer the bigger that feathering is, and you also have smooth, and that's like a very soft feather. Okay, and you can use them in conjunction with one another, so it doesn't look like you've just gone and cut it with a knife. Contrast, I'll show you that. It ups the sharpness of your edges, which may or may not be useful to you. You may want it to be soft, but it can give you a different way of sharpening edges. May help with refining the edge. And shifting edges, if all your edges are equally wrong, you can either shift them in slightly or shift them out. You can see the difference there. Usually this is left on 0. If I can get it down to 0, I can actually punch in the number 0. There we are, and that's where it normally would be, but you can pull the edges in or pull them out, push them in, pull them out slightly, but it would have to be equally wrong because it does it as an equal amount all the way around your selection. Decontaminating colors, that's if you were doing people's hair or something like that. You might want to decontaminate background colors so that it's not too obvious or doesn't impact your selection. So you'd have that on if you're decontaminating colors. And also output, you can put this selection that you've just made to your layers panel by doing a layer mask. By doing a new layer, that layer mask would be in the same layer that you're working in. You can just put it to a new layer. You can also have a new layer with a mask, or you can just put it out to a different document. Okay, so different ways of working with your pictures after you've made the selection and you put them into a layer which would be above your background, and you can continue working on them. I'll just click cancel. So you're making selections with this brush so that you can work on parts of your picture later and be more accurate with your areas of the picture you're working on. That's the purpose of making a selection. We'll move on to the other ones in the next video. I'm not going to do these as too long because they'll be too boring to watch if you're trying to watch them all, and I think that's probably long enough. So basically, a quick selection tool allows you to make very quick selections and for you to be able to work on your picture at a later stage. Okay, so have a go and just practice using the selection tool, and in particular pushing your selection in or expanding the selection out, and also zoom in on the area you're going to work on so your selection can be more accurate. Okay, thanks for watching.